Hello everybody, today's topic, I'm so excited. It's again one of my favorites, how to write a poem. Now just a disclaimer, I'm not an expert poet. I've never been to an institution of like a college where they teach poetry. No, it's not at the academic level, so I won't really help you when it comes to writing poetry academically, because I have a different definition of poetry, and that's what I shall share with you today. But before I delve into that, let's recap on neuroplasticity. I forgot to mention some few things, and I just want to do that. So neuroplasticity was this idea that your brain can change over time because of how it's wired, because of how it works. And we saw that the way the brain works in relation to your behavior is such that every experience you have, every activity you do or habit is actually recorded in your nervous system. Everything you do is recorded in your nervous system, and that means that you can actually change that. And another concept I want to share here is that whenever that activity you do is combined with emotion or with passion, it actually creates deeper, thicker, bolder neural pathways. And so next time you do an activity, next time you want to learn something, a new language, a new hobby, you want to learn a subject, try to add passion, emotion, enthusiasm into it. And as you do that, your behavior or that new experience that you are desiring will become much more pronounced. And that's it from neuroplasticity. That was video number 1. Now today, as I said, we're talking about how to write a poem. First, I just want to define poetry. Poetry is not, my definition of poetry is not this academic thing of mixing words and being able to write some excellent masterpiece of high words and ecstasy of words. No, that's not what poetry is to me. Poetry to me is simply being able to express yourself in form of speech and writing. Poetry is being able, is the core ingredient or element of poetry to me is expressionism. I don't know if that word exists. Expressionism. I have poetic license, I can use that. Anyways, expressionism, the ability to express yourself. And still on that point though, today's poetry, and many people, they care much more about eloquence. Eloquence is important. The ecstasy of words, the ability to choose the right diction, it is important, but that does not replace the content. The originality of the content is very important. If you can bring something up that's originally and uniquely yours, that's the true signature of poetry. It's not just about eloquence. Eloquence means nothing without that genuineness and originality in your content. Actually, I'm working on a book. I've written a pamphlet. It's a small pamphlet. I wrote it for my poetry partner. It's entitled From Poetry to Poetry. Notice the difference from poetry, which is ordinary poetry, to poetry. It has that element of power and that element of impact and influence and change and effect. And the reason why I came up with the word poetry, and I know maybe it might exist somewhere online, but here's my theory behind why I came with poetry. I believe that poetry lacks power. And so how can we make sure that our poetry has power? Because poetry that lacks power is simply just words. But I believe that elementarily that words are powerful. There's this poem I wrote on how words are powerful, and it says, if speech becomes our beginning, how are we to begin our speech? So it alludes to, it's based on the allusion, it alludes to the fact that God created, and when God created, he said, let there be, and it was. Let there be, and it was. It's a universe. By a universe we were created. Now, if speech becomes our beginning, how are we supposed to begin our speech? And speaks to how we are supposed to respect speech and how we're supposed to be mindful when we are talking about speech, written communication, and all those things. And so that's the idea behind the book, the pamphlet rather, From Poetry to Poetry. And today I'm just going to share some of the principles that I took from that book, actually. It's actually 5 stages. If you want to write a poem, you can follow them and you're going to be superb with your poem, I think. Right, so let me just run through them. The first stage when you're writing a poem is the pre-poetic stage. And the second one is the pen stage. The third one is the practice stage. The fourth one is the performance stage. And lastly, the post-performance stage. I came up with this, and this is what I use in my poetry all the time, and it kind of helps me. So let's go to the pre-poetic stage. In the pre-poetic stage, this is like the first thing you have to do before you even touch a pen. This happens in your mind. So you isolate the topic and you specialize on the theme, and all those things happen in the mind. But I want to stress a very important point. As I said, eloquence without content is useless. You must have that originality of content. Now, to write about something you don't know is useless. And that's the point I want to share in the pre-poetic stage. Don't write about something you do not know. Instead, whenever you are asked, or whenever you want to write about something you're interested in, but you do not know about that thing, take that as an opportunity for learning and find out more about the subject that you want to write about. And so poetry to me is like a learning process. So whenever I'm asked to present on a specific topic, I have to learn about that topic using all the different sources that I have. And the idea of poetry is simply to take that information and present it in a way that's different from how it was previously known, or just from a different perspective, to just allow this expansion of the mind so that people should think outside of the box. So very important, do not write about what you do not know. Only write when you have enough information or enough experience on the topic. Now, secondly, you can write, you go to the pen stage. Now that you know what you're writing about, now that you have an idea about what you're doing, then you can take your pen and write. And the pen stage is simple. Just follow the writing process. There's pre-writing, and there's actually the actual writing stage. Then you do the editing, and then you publish your work. And in that writing stage, there are many different things you should do. So poetry is not like a normal language. So if I take this newspaper here and I go to an article and I just pick up these 2 paragraphs, that's not poetry. This is prose. These are just words, but I can take the very same words and arrange them in a different way that will make that poetry. So poetry, I think, to me is just the ability to express yourself in a different way, in a unique way, in a way that's not so standard, in a way that's not really normal, if I can put it that way. So that's the pen stage. Make sure you use figurative language. Make sure you use different aspects of form of communication, idioms. It's endless. You can use a lot of things, but make sure you are not using the normal language that people use in literature, in prose, or in other forms of life. Don't do that. So it has to be unique. It has to be different. And that's what I think. If you do that, your poetry will be successful and you will enjoy and love it. And thirdly, it's the practice stage. Now, practice stage, my idea of poetry is there are different types of poetry. You have the conventional poetry, which is where you write a piece and it's on paper, but there has been this new emergence of different type of poem, and it's a spoken word, and that's what I enjoy the most. So spoken word is poetry that's written to be performed, and so if you go into that extra stage, then make sure you practice before you mirror. Practice makes perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Okay, and so that's the practice stage. Make sure you practice everything, your eye contact, etc. And the next stage, which is performance stage, is just the mirroring of the practice stage. So make sure your tone is proper, and your eye contact, and every other little details, your attire, body language communicates a lot than your actual poem itself. So you have to really be careful when it comes to doing that. And lastly is the post-performance stage. And I'm going to say this is the most important part. And it sounds a little bit weird, but yeah, it is. If you are doing poetry and you want to develop, then you have to consider the last stage, the post-performance stage. So in this stage, you reflect on your performance, you reflect on your piece, you take your poem again, you read it, you read it aloud, you kind of like analyze your poem and then find out what are your weaknesses. I mean, did you like the poem? Could you have done better? And then try to emulate and assimilate that into your next poem, into your next piece. And so I think if you use these 5 random pieces that I put together, these 5 keys to writing poetry, you can try. Just come up with the topic, learn more about the topic, then try to write about the topic in a way that's not conventional writing, like how they write books and stuff, just in a unique way. And then practice about if you want to perform this poem. And make sure you do practice and then you perform it right. And then after you do that, make sure you reflect on how the poem went. And tomorrow I'm going to try and take all these things that I said today and put them into practice and perspective. I am going to do my first poem. I'm going to do a poem for you, recite a poem for you guys, and I hope you will like it. So thank you guys for being with me. Just another thing, just to reiterate what I said, there's a pamphlet that I wrote entitled From Poetry to Poetry, and I'm still revising it again. It's gonna be out next year, 2019, and I hope you guys will have access to that by that time. Otherwise, thank you so much. That's today's video, how to write a poem with purpose.